Well, guys, I would like to start this lesson by reading a little bit of the very first part of this particular book. It's called Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. Really, really good one. I recommend if any of you want to take a look at it if you haven't. Lolita, light of my life, fire of my loins, my sin, my soul, Lolita. The tip of my tongue taking a trip of 3 steps down the palate to tap at 3. On the teeth, Lolita. She was low, playing low in the morning, standing 4 feet 10 in the sock. She was Lola in slacks. She was Dolly at school. She was Dolores on the dotted line. But in my arms, she was always Lolita. Really nice. Take a look at it. So, well, guys, as I mentioned before, we're going to require to follow the presentation in all these different videos. So I'm going to ask you, if you haven't, to go and download the presentation before we start with this particular activity right now. And if you already did, well, let's just go to the slide number 2. You will see that in the number 1 we're going to have like a slide that says most relevant periods in Anglo-American literature. Let's go to the number 2, okay? So the idea is that basically in this course we're going to, most of it, start working on the different periods of American literature. We're going to cover, depending on our time and how fast we can go, we're going to cover 7, 8, I don't know, different periods. But for that we require to know, first of all, or a definition, or try to provide a framework to what is exactly a period, right? So, we will see over here some definitions or some precisions that are important in order to understand this particular thing. So, first of all, you will see in the presentation that it says that a period is a dominant mode. What is dominant, right? It means that some other things exist, right? But this is the one that at a certain point was most recognized, most practiced, more popular, or something like that, right? So if I ask you right now, like, what is the dominant genre in music? Well, most likely you will tell me reggaeton, maybe, electronic. Does that mean that there is no other sort of musical genre? There is no classical music or merengue or salsa or any of those things? Yes, of course they exist, right? Nevertheless, in this moment it is dominant. It doesn't make it good or bad or wrong or anything like that, but at this very moment it is dominant. Of course, within certain circles. So it means that during all these different periods that we're going to talk about, there were probably many other representations, trends, ideas, or styles that were available at the moment. But for different historical reasons and political and social that we're going to cover eventually, you will see that they were dominant at the time. So if we follow with the definition, it says that it is a dominant mode, style, type of literature within a specific historical context, right? So each period is going to have certain approximate years in which it was popular or dominant, and then eventually there was a change or something like that. Now, it says a period is usually indicative of the controlling philosophical perspective of the time. So you are going to see that many of these periods have like a strong political component or social. Many of some other things that were happening in let's say in the geographical zone at the time had a lot of repercussions, and it's not, let's say, a fact that is only dependable on the writers or on the authors of the time. Not at all. You will see that it has a lot of different implications in terms of different areas of life. Now, let's say that we have a third component in there, uh, and it says, to summarize, that the periods are not necessarily confined to literature. If you take a look at the different schools and the different periods, you will see that there is Gothic literature, Gothic music, Gothic architecture, uh, different manifestations of that, right? For Baroque or for Romanticism or for Neoclassicism, you are going to find that there are, as I mentioned, manifestations in music, manifestations in architecture, in the way people dressed, yes, and that is like a style. So that is another proof that we don't have only, let's say, manifestations in literature, but that is like a movement that usually goes through the whole different activities and the whole different amount of trends and possibilities that people used to have back then. And finally, we're going to have dates as approximations, right? So you will see that normally on the top of the slide, there are, every time that we have like a period, there are some years. Okay, those years are estimations of when did it start and when did it end. Like, of course, it's impossible to know exactly a particular moment in which it started or ended or something like that. Okay, so it's important that we know about that in terms of periods. Now, that will cover the part related to periods. Then we have the second part, that is the if you see at the first slide, it says most relevant periods in Anglo-American literature, right? So we already defined periods. Let's go with the next term, that is Anglo-American, right? Well, we have this little problem specifically with, let's call it American English, in which the word America is usually associated with only the United States. Okay, so let's say that America as a continent, North America, Central America, and South America, has a lot to offer in terms of literature. Nevertheless, our time is limited, so what we're going to do during this particular course is that we're going to discuss all the literature that is, let's say, geographically contained in the limits of what we know today as the United Kingdom, yes, and that included England, Ireland, even a little bit of Wales, right? So we can discuss all of that, and also the literature of the United States of America. Of course, we're going to cover or discuss now and then some things related to Latin American literature, or maybe some things related to also European literature. Actually, one of the books that we have for the first time for the final event is Italian. One of them. Like, usually, I only include North American or English books, British. But well, I think that this time it was a good time to include one of those. So normally we're going to be discussing that. Okay. Finally, let's talk about the third term. The third term in the definition, most relevant periods of Anglo-American literature. So probably that literature concept is the one that is most difficult to grasp, right? It's a pity that we are not able to interact right now, because normally I ask people this question, and what I get is a lot of different answers, because usually people reduce this to books, right? So I would ask this question, and people would say, well, anything that is written in books, right? So I say, what? Marketing is literature. Let's say the leaflet or the brochure that you receive for um, for a promotion or for advertising, is that literature? Oh, so people would say, no, 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 not really. That can be. And then, people start like telling things now. So maybe poetry is literature, maybe tales or novels, stories are literature. So everything that is in book is literature. And then I ask, so if I tell a story, yes, if I tell a story, is that not literature? So people would say, well, not really. This is just people talking. But then I tell them, for example, like, have you ever actually read Snow White or Little Red Riding Hood or any of the fairy tales that are so popular? And the answer of many people is no. Yes, maybe some of you have read, actually taken a book and read that, and that's just fine and excellent. But most of the people have not done that. Uh, so it means that oral tradition is really, really important as well. Yes, because many of those stories exist since the time in which people didn't know how to write, in which writing was inexistent, or even later on, some centuries later, when there was a more or less established language, and they just didn't have the means to print something, or they have to do it by hand. So, well, if we group the versions that we have right now, we have books and stories, okay, like oral tradition. But then I say, like, so what about the internet, guys? If you have a blog and you write your stories in there and your tales in there, if you have Facebook and you write a mini tale in your status, or even if you are really, really skillful and you're able to write really, really short stories and you can write them on Twitter, so it's not that literature? Well, yes, sure, it is. What about comic books? Aren't they literature? Yes, sure, they are. What about theater, right? Like Shakespeare wrote mostly theater, and cannot that be considered literature? So the concept grows and grows and grows, and it gets bigger and bigger, and we arrive to difficult situations such as considering, is music literature, for example? Like, can be that considered? Because many stories that I mean, many songs that we listen in music are stories, right? Or some of them, even if they are not narrated, they can be considered as lyrical, meaning they are poems, right? And a couple of years ago, there was this very famous rock singer that was called Bob Dylan, and he earned a Nobel Prize of Literature, and there was a scandal between the academics that professionally study literature, because some of them said that that was not possible, that shouldn't be, that that's not literature, but then some of the other ones did. But anyway, they didn't agree. He, in the end, won the prize, right? So, as I mentioned, the concept grows bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's difficult to limit, right? So, for this particular course, we are going to stay with two definitions of literature, and the first one is that literature is a conventional concept. Okay, one more time, literature is a conventional concept. What does it mean, convention, right? Convention is like when people get together and reunite for a particular interest, right? So there are tattoo conventions, or there are comic book conventions, or there are business conventions, and it's basically a reunion of people in which they all want to discuss or about the same topic or share the same interest. So literature is conventional because it's whatever people say it is at some point in history. So if we go back to let's say the initial times of humankind, well, literature was stories around the bonfire at the end of the day. Yes, parents and children and grandparents telling stories around the bonfire, and that was literature. They all agreed that that was literature. If somebody would say, hey, literature is something that is written, I don't know, somewhere else, they would say, no, that is not literature. We do not agree. We do not convene that that is literature, right? Then, eventually, we have this part related to writing, and So probably at the time, people say everything that is on books, everything that is on parchments, everything that you can just physically touch, right? Uh, and then eventually when somebody suggested that blogs or computer based stories were literature, probably they rejected that, right? And so on. It really depends on technology, on interest. We don't know if tomorrow we are going to be telling stories by means of holograms, by means of directly inputting something into our brains, yes, a chip or something like that. And if that happens, well, then that will be literature, okay? So it is conventional. It is conventional. I know that it may be a little bit vague, the definition, but that's it. And then the second definition of literature that I would like to share with you is one that I always remember, right? They say that theoretically speaking, we can go to a lot of different authors and have a lot of different structuralist approach or based on the utility or based on different things. But well, one that I really like is that literature is mirror and memory. Okay, so that would be a second definition. Literature is mirror and memory. Why is it mirror? Well, because it reflects us. Yes. If you want to know, hopefully you will see that during the course. If you want to know how people of a certain time, of a certain country, of a certain, let's say, status or of a certain political preference, how those people were at some point, sure, you can go and take a book of history and you can read about them and you can get to know them. That's a possibility. But then you can also take a novel of that time, a poem of that time, a collection of tales of that time, and for sure that is going to tell you how they were. Yes, because literature reflects us. Let's say that we discuss or we talk about what we are. Yes, and we try to reflect that into the papers, into the pages of a book. If they are physical or digital, that does make no difference. But basically, that is what we have in terms of that reflection. Even when we write about impossible things or things that are fictional or things that are completely fantastic, right? So if you think about Tolkien and the Lord of the Rings, well, there are a lot of fantastic things, and dragons and elves and magic and all these different things. But the core values of the thing, yes, the thing that he was trying to reflect was friendship, was cooperation, was evil versus good, was a lot of different topics that are supremely humane. Yes, even if we have all these different characters that are a little bit fantastic, the thing that he wants to reflect are completely humane. Same happened with the space-based adventures. If you want to talk about Star Wars or I don't know, Harry Potter or any of these things that are really really fantastic, or even I don't know, horror books such as Stephen King or anything that you can think about. Even if we have these terrible monsters, well, many of them reflect very human feelings and emotions. So that is why literature is mirror, right? What about the second component, the memory part? Well, that part of the memory is related basically to how literature is a way to record our history. Even if what is happening is fictional or not. Let's say that there are certain novels and narratives that are really, really close to reality. If you take a look at Charles Dickens, if you take a look at some of the literature that was produced during the time of the French Revolution, well, many of them are very realistic, and they sort of are guardians of the history of humankind. Yes, you can go back to them and read them, and you are going to find the memory of humankind in there. And one more time, even if we're talking about things that are completely fictional, well, we are going to see that if we read well and if we read correctly and if we interpret and use our talents and our insight, we are going to discover mm, certain things of the moment in these apparently fantastic stories. A great example is Gulliver's Trips. It seems to be really fantastic, and there are like giants and strange people and horses that talk and all these different things. But in the end, you will see that that is like a critique or a parody of the governing class of the moment. So basically, those are like the two concepts that I can provide in order to close this particular lesson. Uh, Literature is conventional, and literature is mirror and memory. Okay, so hopefully we were able to clarify that. Now, into the next video, we are going to discuss a little bit about the first period of American or Anglo-American literature, that is the Anglo-Saxon one. Okay, so thank you very much, guys. See you on the next video.